Writers aren't people exactly. Or, if they're any good, they're a whole lot of people trying so hard to be one person. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Leigh Hull.
And I'm Leigh Esses. We wanted to give a quick heads up that yes, our giveaway is over for celebrating our 1-year anniversary as a podcast and for celebrating Leigh's finishing her first draft of her first book. But we have something big planned for NaNoWriMo, so stay tuned.
Make sure to follow us on Facebook and you'll get all the updates there.
So what do I do when all the characters feel the same?
Write different characters. This is a common problem for especially new writers who are still trying to figure out their style, their particular voice. They tend to write from their voice and not the character's voice. This is why the quote at the beginning is so great, because as a writer, you should really try to be a whole lot of people in one person.
There should be a facet of you in every one of those characters.
The word distinction is very important here. A facet of you, a part of you, not you. So we're breaking from our normal flow that we've had this month of providing an example. It's really hard to write a 30-second example that represents this problem of all the characters feeling the same. This is something that you can see over a whole scene or a whole book or a couple of chapters where all the characters just feel like carbon copies of themselves. And if that's the case, likely you are writing from your own voice. To give kind of context example for this, my early attempts at fiction writing, all of my characters feel the exact same. One story comes to mind. I was writing a medieval fantasy kind of story, and all of my characters had the same kind of word choice. They all had the same kind of flow in their speech and how they thought. Everything was just a carbon copy of how I wanted to be in that time.
I had the same thing, and a lot of my stories, it's sort of a Leigh S's trope almost, of having the good guy that is terrifying and you're like glad he's on your side, but you know you don't want to annoy him. I have that character in a lot of my stories that I've written, a lot of my books. I have it as Black, I have it as Mose, I have it as Anna, I have it as several different characters.
So getting into how to identify if your characters all feel the same. We pointed out a little bit in providing our own examples, but the first one is that all of your characters agree on everything.
We approached this topic a little bit in the awkward dialogue episode, but this also comes up in the non-dialogue aspects. Everybody has the same motivation for taking down the bad guy.
Another thing to look out for is if they all have similar skill sets. So if all of your characters in your action novel are really good fighters or really accurate marksmen, that is another sign that your characters are too similar.
One of the things to keep in mind when you are looking at your characters' skill sets is to make sure they have a role in the story. This person, their job is to hack into the CIA. That's it. You're giving this person the spotlight for half of a chapter. And if everybody has that same skill set, you end up with a little bit of a Mary Sue in that your main character can do everything, which is to be avoided.
You also want to look at the choices that your characters are having to make. If all of your characters are simply choosing between something bad and something good, then they'll feel bland. So you want to give them a choice between something bad and something even worse.
And what that looks like should be different for every character. I have some characters that would let her parents die in order to save that bus full of people. And I have other characters who would be like, I don't know anybody on the bus. They can burn. I'm saving my parents. That trolley problem is what it's called in philosophy. That question should be answered differently by different kinds of characters. This issue of characters all feeling the same isn't just in dialogue. It isn't just in skill sets. It isn't just in character design, but it's in your word choice, how they sound. I'm mostly talking to writers who write from more than one point of view at this point. We should be able to tell exactly whose point of view it is by the opinions of the text outside of dialogue and the word choice.
So let's get into how to fix some of these things. When it comes to characters agreeing on everything, your characters need to have a developed history in your mind that drives their choices. So every character needs to have an opinion. They could all be reaching the same direction, but they're getting there in different ways.
So when you see your characters agreeing, they should have different motivations behind agreeing. That comes down to not backstory, but opinions. It's much more interesting to have this character when we know what their opinion is every time. I have a character who's a conspiracy theorist. He feels very different than a lot of the other tertiary characters in the story because he has very particular opinions. How he got there, not important. He's not a main character.
If you have the problem that all of your characters or many of your characters have similar skill sets, use Pixar's method. Combine characters whenever possible. If you have a couple of people that do essentially the same thing, maybe they should just be one person, one character. So to be clear in this, we are talking about your main characters. It is more acceptable if your tertiary characters are stereotypical in some kind of way that fit a niche in characterization. So you have the typical barmaid, or you can flip it and make it a typical barman that's serving to all the pretty women. You can have those tertiary characters fit those classic roles without having to spend a lot of time characterizing them, but they still need to be different in some way.
One of my favorite examples of making secondary, tertiary characters interesting is actually the musical Into the Woods. The main character is the baker and his wife. They make a lot of the stereotypical hero characters, the prince and the princess trapped in a tower. These are all secondary, tertiary characters. So the story from their point of view is far more interesting than the hero characters that we normally see. So yes, each character is the hero in their own story, and that would be what makes them interesting. But you have to keep in mind the story that you're telling. Does this little detail about this character move the story along? If not, keep the story moving. And sometimes that means deleting characters. Sometimes that means setting aside characters. Sometimes that means combining characters.
The final problem that is common in having all the characters feel the same is word choice in both the point of view and the dialogue. Like I said earlier, this is very common if you are writing in your personal voice. To fix this, I actually advise watching really good television with a diverse cast and hearing the different kinds of words and phrases and how the different kinds of people talk. Because if you have that character that's never had a formal education, that grew up on the streets, they're not going to use these $10 words. They're going to be using simple phrases, more street type talk, common phrases that you'd hear everywhere.
So one of my solutions that I go through, and I don't ever write any of it down, but I think through it in my head, is I have an imaginary cocktail party with all of the characters, and often with characters from my other books. Throw them all in an imaginary room together and figure out who agrees, who disagrees. If these two characters are both feeling the same, then put them in a room together and figure out how they're different. And then go back and highlight that in the book. The last solution I want to just quickly point out is make sure your cast is diverse, giving them interesting disabilities perhaps, or giving them interesting sexual orientations. Make sure your characters are representing a wide collection of people, not just your classic Hollywood hero characters.
Making your characters feel different is something that you should be striving for in your first draft. It makes it a lot easier. However, it's okay if the first time around you find yourself slipping into your voice. You can go back, you can fix it later. You just need to get the story out, get the story down, get the idea for the characters, especially if you're like me, you tend to pants everything from the characters to the plot to all the details. It's okay if the first time around it's just getting something on the page, and then you can finesse and define the characters in the process. And if you do that, make sure you go back to the beginning and make the characters, that personality that you ended with, the same in the beginning.
And make sure you're having fun with it. As with all of these issues that we've talked about this month, having fun in your writing process is more important than getting this detail right because Leigh said so. It's about enjoying the whole process and
writing selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.